Welcome, everyone. Let's take a look at the moles. Moles are related to shrews. They're in the same order, but they're in their own family, Talpidae. And as I'm going to ask you for every chapter that we have in this textbook, what did L. Brock say? Write down in your note template things that you found really interesting or questions that you still have, and we can discuss those via email or text. I'm happy to clear up any problems that you still have with the reading. We've got exactly two species of moles that live in the Finger Lakes. There's a third species of mole that lives in the eastern part of New York State, but we don't have to deal with that here. You've got the hairy-tailed mole at the top, and you've got the star-nosed mole at the bottom. Now look at that 6-inch ruler there. Both of these guys are within the size range of, let's say, mice and shrews. They're in fact bigger and chunkier than all of our mice and shrews, but they're within reason of that. So as we're talking about identification, I'm going to be thinking of who might you confuse these guys with. And I'll make sure that you have the key characteristics to tell these guys from mice and shrews. Do you know anything about moles at all before we get started? Like culturally, most people know moles dig. Most people think that moles are blind or can't see very well. Mole Man is a character on The Simpsons up there. He's got little itty bitty eyes and very thick glasses. So let's find out if moles in fact are blind. We're going to start by looking at the star-nosed mole. You should never confuse this with anything else. There's nothing except a shrew that's snorting a squid that you might confuse this with. 22 fleshy projections that come off of the nose. They're for sensing the surroundings, and they're an important organ for them for survival and finding food. But without that star nose, there's a characteristic that's shown here that really makes this a mole, and it's these gigantic feet. We're looking at these creepy fennel seed looking nails on top of this Michael Jackson jeweled glove that they have. The nails are for digging into the soil and loosening it up, and that big front paw is for pushing the soil to the side. We use the word for digging mammals in the other PowerPoint. What was that word again? Fossorial, correct. So hopefully all of those vocabulary words that I gave you in the introduction are going to get used over and over again throughout the rest of the semester. The leading question, though, that I asked you is, are moles actually blind? And a group of scientists did a study a few years back where they took the brain of a mole and they looked at each of the different parts of the brain, the part that controls vision, the part that controls hearing, and so on. And they looked at the wiring, the nerves that went to each of those brain parts. And obviously, the more nerves that would go to a particular brain part, the more information that can go to that, and therefore the more important it would be. So they determined which senses were most important to moles based on the nerves going to those different parts of the brain. And of course, they did a nerdy sciencey thing where they made charts and graphs and did it all by numbers. But they did a really cool thing for the rest of us that aren't scientists. They hired an artist to draw a star-nosed mole, but it changed the proportions from the way they actually are in real life to what would these body parts look like if they were in proportion to the nerves that get sent to the brain. So the more nerves that went to this sensory organ to the brain, the bigger the artist drew it. And here's what he ended up drawing. Of course, you were going to expect that all of those fleshy projections were going to be huge on the star-nosed mole. You don't invent something cool like that nobody in the world has but you and then not use it. But would you have expected it to be this gigantic? Huge, huge sensory organ. And then shout out here to whiskers. Your cat's got these as well. These are also sensing things down in those tunnels. And then there's that eye. So the eye is still visible to us in the drawing, but it's tiny. So that tells us that moles are not blind, but they certainly don't see very well. I wouldn't want to be behind one in a traffic situation with the mole driving. And then here's a common misconception for students. So they see this giant front foot, and many times in class I'll have a student say, of course that's big. It's really important for them to dig. although that's true, remember that this drawing is all about sense organs. So what sense would their foot have? Of course, the sense of touch. And it's not these long, sharp nails. It's not this pebbly surface. Check it out. It's all of these fine little hairs that they have on this foot. And you can back up the video if you want and have a look at the last picture that I showed you, because it will show you those hairs IRL. Here is a star-nosed mole with freezer burn. Sorry about that. But I wanted to show you the eyeball. So it's super tiny. I push the hair back so that you can see it. And it's just not much at all. They really don't rely on vision. So calling them blind is like calling a person bald, even though he's got a few hairs on the top of his head. And then if we look at the ears, moles actually do have ears. They just don't have external ears like we do. So I found this guy dead at our Mueller Field Station, in fact, and I was with a group of students, so I parted away all the hair. Hey, I'm doing the motion right here while I'm recording this like you can see me. What a doob. And there's the ear underneath all the fur there. It just doesn't have an external ear. So if they were really serious about hearing, they'd have an external ear to funnel in the noise, but they don't. So this makes things doubly bad for moles, right? Not only can they not see very well, but they don't even have external ears to hook eyeglasses onto. It's a shame. It's tough being a mole. On your exam, both your midterm and your final, you're going to have to identify some species. So what if I had this picture as one of the photos on the test? Would you be able to identify this animal? You all should be able to tell that this is a mole, and there's one key ingredient in this photo that tells you it's a mole, and it's those gigantic feet. My goodness, we talked about this already, the idea that they have huge feet for digging, and nobody else has those. So automatically, this is a mole because of those feet. Now, if you further knew that this was the hairy-tailed mole instead of the star-nosed mole, fantastic. But I am going to tell you right now, I will just accept mole. I will just accept shrew. We're only going to do that in a few groups of animals, and it tends to be these smaller guys. Can you see the other characteristic that's in here that shows you that this is not a shrew? Besides those big front feet, what else in here tells you it's not a shrew? Did you get it? It's the teeth. So because these teeth are white, this can't be a shrew in North America. All the shrews in North America have dark teeth. Yeah, that worked out perfect. That is not the color of the teeth of shrews, but I think you get the point that I am trying to make there. You know, I do have one last thing that I have to tell you about, and it's the hair of these guys. Do you recall when we did the order and family PowerPoint that I told you that they have very smooth fur? If you don't recall it, I promise you it's in there in the notes. The point here is that shrews and moles have their hair attached to their body in an extremely primitive way. Advanced mammals like ourselves have our hair connected to our skin by an individual muscle. That's what goosebumps are, by the way. All those little bumps on your skin when you get cold, those are individual muscles that each attach to a hair follicle. These guys don't have that. So their hair can flip and flop back and forth and not be uncomfortable. Like they literally, their hair doesn't have a particular direction that it lays. They can't get bedhead. Let's see if you understand what I'm talking about. Who's got a cat? Okay, get your cat, put it in your lap. Here's your homework assignment. I would like you to pet your cat, but I want you to pet your cat starting from the tail and going to the head. Yeah, some of you are just smiling or shaking your head because you know that cats do not like to be pet in the wrong direction. Well, moles and shrews that spend so much time underground literally do not have a wrong direction. I thought that was kind of cool. Cool enough to spend a minute and a half of your life on. Would you look at this skeleton? My gosh, this thing looks enormous. This is our little mole here. I almost said shrew. There's our little mole. There's that big foot. And then there's that carnivore tooth pattern all throughout, but the teeth are white instead of dark like the shrew. Even though they have a carnivore tooth pattern, I did tell you about the shrews that they also have that carnivore tooth pattern, but they'll eat plants as well as animals. Well, that's true for the moles as well. They will ingest some plant material, but they do not have an omnivore tooth pattern. The plants are just I just sort of eat them. It's the meat that's really important. While we're talking about the differences between moles and shrews, I did want to point out one last characteristic for you. So this is a tail of a star-nosed mole, and if you see that bulge in the tail right there, that's actually a fat deposit. So shrews have such a high metabolism, they cannot store fat. Moles have a high metabolism, but it's not hyperactive like on the shrew, and they do actually store fat. So that's another difference between these two guys that I thought was worth mentioning. Well, there's really only one concept left to talk about, and that's molehills. There's an old expression. You might have to ask your parents or your grandparents about this, you kids. But the expression is don't make a mountain out of a molehill. And what they mean is mountains are big, molehills are small. Don't take a small problem and turn it into a big one in your mind. That's what it means. I think it's actually a good expression. And I can apply that to molehills. Sometimes people go crazy because there's there to be a couple piles of dirt in their yard ruining their perfectly manicured lawn. My goodness. What do you think's underneath your grass? It's all soil. Don't worry about it. So moles end up becoming the enemy of some people because they create these tunnels and create these molehills. Let's take some decent notes here on this concept and make sure you know exactly what we're talking about. So in your notes, it asks you to describe the two kinds of tunnels that moles make. I guess I would suggest you listen to what I'm saying and not write at the same time. Like you don't have to do it like you're in class, right? So either pause this and write this down, or listen to me first and then decide what you want to write. But don't be scrambling to write and only paying half attention to what I'm saying. You've made it this far into the video. You obviously care enough. Let's do this right. So the two kinds of tunnels that moles make. First, they have very shallow tunnels for feeding. I'm talking about just under the surface because there's a ton of activity under there. That's where there's lots of insects and worms for them to eat. They create these tunnels, and then they're more like subway systems. So they use these tunnels over and over again. A perfect day for a mole would be a day that he never has to dig. He just goes through his subway system, his tunnels that are already created there, and he eats anything that, are you ready? Falls, crawls, or grows into his tunnel. If it's a bug or a worm or something that crawls into their tunnel, they'll eat it. And then as roots start growing into their tunnel, they'll prune them back and ingest them as well. They make these tunnels mostly by compressing the soil. So imagine a mole is sitting there and he pushes right and left, and then he kind of turns onto his side and he pushes up and down. And he keeps doing that as he scooches forward, making the original tunnels. And that way he doesn't have to excavate the dirt. All that extra energy and time to move all that soil, just push it out of the way with those big honking front feet. And he creates his surface tunnels mostly by compression. If you're in an area where there are molehills, go look carefully. You should be able to see the ridges of the surface tunnels of moles because the direction they can push in easiest is up because there's the least amount of soil above them. Well, they also need deep tunnels. They need deep tunnels in winter. Moles are active all winter long because bugs are active all winter long. They're just active way down low. So the deeper the colder the winter is, the deeper they have to dig their tunnels so that they're still in an area where insect life is going to be active, and they use that for feeding. That's also where I would call their living quarters. Their den is down there. The nursery is down there. You don't want to sleep 2 inches below the surface and just have any dumb old animal be able to dig you out. You want to sleep 18, 20 inches below the surface where it's going to take somebody a long time to get you, right? Doesn't that make sense? So these deep tunnels are the ones that the molehills come from because they can't just compress the soil. They can't just push it to the side because the soil is already so compacted down deep where you are. Is that all making sense? Is everybody cool with all this? Molehills are generally about the size of a dinner plate. Just mound up some mashed potatoes on that dinner plate, and that's what we're looking at for a molehill. Last thing is just one more look at the skull. This is where I have it for your notes in your template if you haven't written anything down yet. Here's the key ingredients. The mole skulls are going to be small. They're going to have a carnivore tooth pattern, but they're going to have white teeth, not dark ones like the shrew. And you do not have to tell one mole skull from another. Notice how I have it written as mole SP. You just need to know if it's a mole or not a mole. Okay? Well, while researching some stuff for this PowerPoint, I found this company that will put this logo on a t-shirt, a coffee mug, a mouse pad, you name it. So you can get yourself a nice Mole Life t-shirt. I do want to say that those Deal With It sunglasses that are on this guy are about to fall off because he doesn't have any external ears to hold them up. These are the things that keep me awake at night, people. All right, I will catch you in our next PowerPoint. Sounds like we're doing lagomorphs next, rabbits and hares. Bye now.